Hey everybody, today I'm going to try to rank the entire MCU. It's a list I've been compiling on my letterbox for about almost a year now. I've tried to do a marathon after I saw Avengers Endgame, and it's just taken me a very long time to finally get through and watch all the movies. So for this list I'm going to go worst MCU movie to best MCU movie. And basically, I'm going to try to do a little review of all of them, so don't really expect full-fledged reviews on these movies later. This is just my opinion. It's going to be off the cuff, and let's get to it. So my bottom ranked movie is Incredible Hulk. This movie came out in kind of a weird era. I mean, was filmed before Iron Man came out, before Dark Knight came out, and it wasn't really trying to establish the universe as much as Iron Man did, and it wasn't really trying to be its own movie as much as Iron Man did. It's kind of a pseudo-sequel to Ang Lee's Hulk. It kind of just continues the Hulk story from an undisclosed part of his life later on, and it just kind of comes off as awkward. It's kind of boring, and it definitely feels more of like Marvel movies in the era of Fantastic Four and kind of post Spider-Man 3 era. It's long, not much happens. Bruce Banner isn't particularly interesting. The villain of Abomination isn't very interesting. So it just kind of overall comes off as a pretty poor movie. The things I do like, at least like the action, definitely was a step up for the time compared to those other movies. It looked a little bit better, but it's not particularly like MCU clockwork we're going to see later, and I'm going to talk about a lot more of the average movies. It's just kind of there, and it's kind of in a weird point where since Mark Ruffalo took over the role and did his own completely different interpretation of the character than what Edward Norton did, it kind of just comes off as weird, awkward, and kind of out of its time. Next up we have Thor. Phase 1 MCU movies were very awkward, kind of. Especially post Iron Man, when they're like, oh, we're actually going to run with this. And it feels like their plan is just to toss origin stories your way, but weren't really concerned about making particularly interesting origin stories. So you got like Captain America First Avenger, which I'll talk about later. And you got this, and then it goes and culminates in Avengers. But really it just kind of falls flat. Like, they didn't really know what they wanted to do with Thor, so it felt pseudo Lord of the Rings-esque, but also mixed with like the superhero tropes of the time. So we've got like Thor learning about his powers, learning about responsibility, blah blah blah. Nothing's very interesting in it. Thor doesn't really have an alter ego, and I don't think Chris Hemsworth was fully comfortable in the role yet to where he is now, where he kind of made it his own. At the time, he's kind of just generic and boring. He did have some kind of funny moments, but nothing particularly special. The only parts of the movie, in terms of action, that's actually exciting is like when he fights the Destroyer, but that's not that great. The side characters, like Natalie Portman, are just bland, and I can see why she wouldn't want to revisit the character until now, coming in with Taika Waititi, and kind of like how the Thor movies evolved to the point where it's actually feasible that her character would get character. So yeah, no, definitely Thor falls pretty flat, and that's a big issue with it. So next up I have Black Panther. I know this is going to make people angry, but my biggest problem with Black Panther is its lost potential. This movie's really long, it's really boring, and we see some really good moments, like the waterfall fight between Killmonger and Black Panther early on, and even the waterfall fight between Black Panther and White Tiger, maybe? I don't really remember what his name was. Those fights are magnificent, but a lot of it is just like especially that final fight between them, I couldn't get invested in, because the Wakanda fight kind of just felt like some sort of like Phantom Menace flashbacks, where it's just like CGI creatures that don't look very good and just kind of fight. And the final fight between Black Panther and Killmonger looks like a PS2 cutscene. Like, it's really bad. And I know the excuse where they're like, oh, they were working on Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame. And it's like, yes, and the CGI in those are pretty good. Problem is, if you don't have the team to make this movie on par with the other movies in terms of special effects and action, then what's the point in making it? I do respect what it did, kind of like adding a black hero, which I think is very important to people, but it just feels like kind of a dud. I can't really get invested with it. And Chadwick Boseman is actually pretty good in like Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame. So he just kind of seems boring. I did like Michael B. Jordan, but especially coming hot off of Creed, it's like I don't know if I really appreciate Chadwick Boseman's or Ryan Coogler's take on Black Panther, and I hope they come back with it. And I think they can do good. Just they need the team, they need the establishment there, and they need to have another good villain, because Killmonger's not a particularly terrible villain. It's just a lot of elements were there that were really good, and all of them kind of felt short for me. It also could have been a little shorter, maybe 20 minutes shorter, and I would have liked it a little bit more. Next up is another one that'll probably make people mad, Avengers. I don't like Avengers on so many levels. It's a missed opportunity. I remember seeing it, like that was one of the last midnight premieres they really did because of the Dark Knight Rises stuff. I remember being really hyped for it and really liking it, and then I kind of put it down after that. Like the MCU as a whole, I was a big comic fan at the time, so getting to see these heroes on screen for the first time was really cool. And building up to Avengers, I had a lot of hype. I saw all the Phase 1 movies, even Thor, multiple times, even though I never really liked that movie. And when Avengers came out, it was kind of just plain. Like, it was shot like a TV show, which, I mean, Joss Whedon, TV director mainly. So it wasn't all that surprising. It just kind of came off like, I don't know, like for all that build-up, it kind of just wasn't there. And Loki was decent, team was decent, their banter was decent, the story felt kind of half-cocked. It was really an Iron Man movie and didn't really have the development he had in his solo movies. Not that 2 had a ton of development, but like 1 and 2 had some okay development. So to go on and basically just have this very plain, not very well shot, not really well thought out movie. The action scene's cool, but I would almost compare it to like Transformers, but a little bit better because these characters don't really need to be characterized because they're already established. But in terms of like if I just saw Avengers and didn't have anything to base it on, I wouldn't really put it out of like a Transformers-esque mindless action tier, because that's essentially what the movie is. Like the acting and the characters are a little better, don't get me wrong, but it's just not great in my opinion. And I felt like a lot of, other than Tony Stark, Captain America and Thor kind of needed more establishment before they did this movie. I think either push it back more or add more establishment, but I didn't get a ton out of Avengers, so that's why it's placed pretty low. Next is Captain America, the First Avenger. Another Phase 1 movie, and this falls into a lot of traps of Thor, but it is a little more enjoyable. First off, we have Red Skull, who's a slightly more entertaining villain. The World War II is a cool time period to set it in. Captain America's fun, but a lot of this movie, the biggest issue is this movie should have been longer a little bit. It had to pack a lot into this time period, because you got the first hour where it's like setting up Captain America. There's like an hour between Steve Trevor being introduced. We learn about Steve Trevor in the first half hour. Then there's a half hour of bullshitting around until he becomes Captain America, and it's like, okay, just get on with it. And then they have to squish World War II into like a half hour, and like through montage. And then they started to establish a pretty good relationship between him and Peggy, but then it all kind of just falls flat at the end to me. Like, it's like, okay, you did the montage. You kind of took out a lot of what would be exciting about this movie. We didn't really get to learn. Like, we see a couple, like, moments that are cute with him and Bucky, but we don't really see that establishment that really starts to show in, like, Winter Soldier and Civil War later on why they're friends. So that kind of almost, like, retrospectively pulls some of the punch from what we see in Winter Soldier. Overall, this is where Marvel movies become a little more just average, in my opinion. Right now, we're still just slightly below average movies, in my opinion. It's not a terrible movie as far as blockbuster goes. It's just, it doesn't really add much. Next is Thor the Dark World. This one, it's shot a lot better than the original Thor. I will say, in Thor, Loki's a little more charismatic than Dark Elf Man, Power Ranger villain. This movie's another one where it's just kind of boring. I'm kind of like, okay, like not much goes on. I think Chris Hemsworth improves a bit on the Thor character, but it still feels like Marvel was kind of in a limbo where they didn't really want to do Thor. They just had to do Thor because he's important in Avengers. And that's not really why you should put a movie together, but it is what it is. This is what we got. It's not 100% horrible. It's watchable. I saw it and I was like, it's okay. But I definitely wouldn't say it's good. Next we have Ant-Man. The first Ant-Man is very devoid of originality, and it's really by the numbers, which the one thing that kind of sucks about ranking these movies is I have that to say about a lot of the next few movies. It's kind of just an Iron Man clone, but instead of the scientist, creating the suit and stuff being the main character, Scott Lang is kind of just a hero by proxy because Hank Pym's too old. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just generic, it's boring, it's another my suit's better than yours type of concept. And at least when Iron Man did that was original, but this movie's kind of just so derivative of Iron Man, just done worse, that it's kind of eye-rolly. It's just kind of like, who can we do next? And they're like, we want to do Ant-Man. Okay. And then they fired Peyton Reed off of it, and it kind of just becomes generic. Like, they could have done something original with this, but they kind of just, they didn't trust the concepts yet. This movie was in production before Guardians came out, so I think they had a little less balls with this movie, and it happened, and then it went, and it's probably one of the most forgettable Marvel movies. Next we have Ant-Man and the Wasp. Similar problems to Ant-Man, really. The one thing I will say that's better about this movie over Ant-Man is that at least the plot's original, but the plot is so inconsequential compared to the rest. Like, after seeing Infinity War, I actually really liked this movie because I was thinking, like, at least it's kind of grounded. It's kind of dialing everything back, and it was sort of refreshing. But on rewatching it, I really just didn't enjoy it that much. It was just generic. Scott Lang is a decent character, but doesn't really feel like he earns the Ant-Man moniker. He's just kind of inconsequentially there, and he does the right thing like every other superhero, but he doesn't have a lot of development. The relationship with his daughter's cute. His relationship with Janet is almost there. Like, there's parts I like of it, but it mostly falls flat. Ghost as a character is underdeveloped. And they did have the two villains. They had Ghost, and then they had the racist guy from Django Unchained. I don't remember his name. Gangster Man. And it's just like, they don't have any faith in this character. His powers are in there. They use it creatively a couple times, but nothing like creative enough. Like him going big to swim through the water. Okay. Him going, his thing's broken. His suit shrinker's broken. In every fucking scene in this movie, it's broken. So he's always just like a midget, or he can't use it, and it's kind of a slog, honestly. And it's just like not very good. At least it has something new. That's what I'll give it over. And next is Avengers Age of Ultron. This movie's shot a lot better than the first Avengers, I'll give it that. The cast is a little better established. This is after Thor 2, Captain America 2, and Iron Man 2, and Iron Man 3. So we know the characters better, so they didn't have to do as much to, like, expand on those characters. Ultron's certainly not as good of a villain as Loki, but the plot makes a little more sense. Actually, Ultron as a villain's awful, but the plot makes a little more sense. It's a little more coherent. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, they both fell really short, and I feel like it wasn't... I still feel like Scarlet Witch kind of falls short. Like, I feel like she was one that, at this point, desperately needs a movie. Like, Black Widow has been in enough side stories and kind of been like a B character in enough movies that I know Black Widow. I like Black Widow. she kind of has the problem like Hawkeye has. I don't think I mentioned this in my part with the Avengers, but like Hawkeye is really underestablished and really underwhelming compared to the rest of the team. But they start to do stuff with him in this movie, and they start doing stuff with him in like Infinity War, which makes him better later. But in terms of Scarlet Witch, to this day she's not very well established. So I didn't really care for her. Most of the time she's just kind of evil henchman to Ultron. And Ultron is just Tony Stark. And this is kind of where I remember me and Aiden started really talking a lot about, the whole, and everybody really. But it's just quips. Everyone's Iron Man because Iron Man sells. And he's funny. Everyone needs to be funny. Everyone needs to be... And it just gets boring. And then when you put like Ultron into it, who should just basically be like a Terminator or something, like a killing machine that's like, okay, I'm gonna just fucking kill everybody, and I'm gonna do this for my evil Earth domination plans. Like, that's what it should be, not here's my quips for 2 hours. I didn't hate Ultron completely when he was quiet. I like Ultron as a villain, and that might be part of the reason this movie's not better, is it's just kind of foiled potential. Like, what if Ultron was just more of an embodiment of Tony's dark side? And I don't mean he's Tony but evil, like he ends up being. But, like, what if he's technical, he's got all these extra robots flying around, and he's just ruthless and wants to kind of rebuild the world in his image. I mean, that's what Ultron is. I also feel like it kind of robs Hank Pym of something later on, that he's just Tony Stark. Like, it adds to Tony Stark's character a little, but none of the character development established in this movie moves on past this movie. Tony Stark's best character development's really in his own films, and in Spider-Man Homecoming a bit, which I'll talk about later. But in the Avengers movies, except for Endgame, which kind of wraps up his story, spoiler alert, I guess, these Avengers movies don't really add much to him. So doing Ultron because Joss Whedon wanted to shortchanges the Hank Pym character a bit. Next is Captain Marvel. I hated this movie when I first saw it, but when I rewatched it a couple days ago, I realized it is a serviceable movie. It's like the Ant-Man movies, but better done. For the most part, it's just average Marvel. Nothing's offensive. All the characters except for Captain Marvel are okay. She doesn't really suck, she just doesn't have a character. It kind of feels like Chris Hemsworth in the first Thor, where she just hasn't found her footing yet. So Captain Marvel, I feel like, could either really go up, or she could never find her footing, and as a character, we're going to basically have the new version of Thor through Captain Marvel. I mean, in terms of lack of character, shows up because she's powerful in the Avengers movies type shit. Really unexciting in that terms. But Samuel L. Jackson's great. I like the kind of the twist on the Kree-Skrull war. Skrulls are traditionally villains. In this movie, they're not really portrayed that way. They're portrayed as misunderstood. That was cool. A lot of these movies have like generic music. This movie kind of wanted to copy Guardians of the Galaxy a bit, where they're like 80s, 90s, 70s pop. It was mostly like 80s and 90s pop in this one, but they would kind of just awkwardly shove it in. There's a part where she's talking to the Kree Overlord lady. It's like her projection of her old Air Force commander. And like Come As You Are by Nirvana plays. We got, what was the final fight scene to? It wasn't Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I want to say it is, but it's some other song where it's like girl power. And it doesn't have like a real reason to be there. It's just kind of awkwardly shoehorned in. It's like, I get it. You know. Captain Marvel's a girl. Cool. Like, I don't need you force feeding me these dumbass songs to tell me she's a girl. Because I get it. She's a girl. And that's fine. I'm not offended by the fact that they're using a female superhero. But you got to, treat her equally to other heroes. Don't just be like, she's a stoic badass who does nothing because she's so stoic, has no character. She's gonna listen to all these girl power songs because she's a girl. Like, I get it. You don't gotta do that. It's a little hammy, but whatever. It's fine movie, whatever. Next we have Guardians of the Galaxy 2. This is another serviceable movie. It feels incredibly unnecessary. Like, for me, I love how Guardians of the Galaxy went so much that before this movie came out, I really wanted a Guardians 2. And after this movie came out, I said, I kind of wish they just did one Guardians of the Galaxy movie. Like, I think it would be cool. Here's a crazy thought. What if the Marvel Cinematic Universe had, like, one-off movies? Like, call it part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because it is, in a way. Maybe, like, the villain, like, Ronan, shows up again in Captain Marvel. And then just call it good. But Guardians 2, it does add to the Peter Quill character. He kind of gets closure on his dad. The team does more stuff. But it kind of just feels like kicking a dead horse a little bit. It was sort of underwhelming. The stuff with Yondu was good. Like, this movie had a lot of really good elements. But I think I've seen it 3 times now, and every time I see it, I'm kind of just like, okay. That was okay. I don't care. And I know a lot of people love Guardians 2, and I'm not trying to take away from that, because I understand. It's a huge franchise at this point. People love it. They're going to keep making it. People are happy with it. And if that's the case for you, good. Just for me personally, I just kind of wouldn't have minded if they kind of just called it good on Guardians of the Galaxy, or didn't have them show up again until Infinity War and kind of just cap everything off there. But, you know, to each their own. Next we have Iron Man 2. This is one of the most hated Marvel films. And it is like a super generic version of the first Iron Man. But I love Tony Stark's character so much. I love Iron Man so much. And I feel like Whiplash was a decent villain. Although I thought Justin Hammer was underwhelming. Whiplash, I don't think I liked the performance as much as Jeff Bridges as Ironmonger. But I definitely didn't mind him as a follow-up villain. I thought it was cool. It was still like a little more smaller scale at that point. This is before Captain America and Thor. And I remember even seeing this in theaters. Like, when I saw it in theaters, I thought it was like, whoa, look at all this stuff. He's shoving his arms in the suitcase and making suits. I liked seeing him fight all those drones. A little Transformers-y at the end, but I like him. I don't think it really did much new for Tony's character. That's a big complaint, because he goes through a pretty complete arc in the first movie. And the future, like Iron Man 3, I feel like kind of takes Tony in a new direction, on a new arc. Endgame takes him on a new arc. This one kind of just retreads. It kind of drags its feet on the first Iron Man movie. And it was kind of just like, wow, the first Iron Man was a success. This universe is working. I know technically Hulk was the second MCU movie, but really this is the second MCU movie as far as it goes, since Incredible Hulk kind of had the rocky history. So, you know, I thought it's good. This is like the dead average to me for the MCU movies. I just feel like it's more of the same. It plays it incredibly safe, probably too safe. But I don't dislike it or like it that much. Like, it's one of those movies where if I'm really feeling Iron Man, I just watched Iron Man 1 and I want more, I'm popping it on, sure. I don't dislike it. It might be a bit of a guilty pleasure. I thought Scarlett Johansson and seeing Nick Fury's character kind of expanded for the first time beyond a cameo was cool. Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow was and is a good choice. We're finally getting her solo movie, which is exciting. Looks like a decent movie from the trailers. So, yeah. Next, now I'm sure a lot of people get mad at me for including this, but I am. My next movie's Venom. And I know what you're going to say. Venom's horrible. Venom is dog shit. And Venom isn't really part of the MCU. I have arguments for why I don't think it's completely terrible, which I'll lay out in a second. And the reason I'm including this isn't really because I consider it part of the MCU, because I know Sony's Spider-Verse is like teetering on the edge of shoehorning itself into the MCU. But that's why I'm including it on this list, because I think it's kind of hilarious that they're shoehorning themselves into the MCU. For one, Venom 2 is supposed to have J.K. Simmons in it, who appeared as J. Jonah Jameson in the original Spider-Man trilogy, yes, but now also showing up in Spider-Man Far From Home as J. Jonah Jameson as well. which I guess you could argue maybe it's the original version, or maybe they're just like, this guy can always play J. Jonah in every universe. But then in the Morbius trailer, you have Michael Keaton showing up in an undisclosed role. But I don't really see Michael Keaton revisiting Spider-Man this early after Homecoming, unless he's reprising his role as Vulture, based on comments from like Amy Pascal while she was still at Sony. Makes me think it's more or less in MCU continuity, even if it isn't. Like a similar level to like Daredevil and stuff, where Kevin Feige would not acknowledge that it's really in the universe, but it kind of is. Like it kind of just, but whatever. Who cares? I'm counting it. This is my video. Venom's in the MCU. I'm counting it for the list. I don't know if he is, but I'm counting it. So, why I think Venom's an okay movie. The villain is dog shit. Venom's a little cheesy. Although, albeit a fairly faithful adaptation of Venom in the comics, I would argue. Just because I feel like Venom has his silly moments, kinda. He's kinda scary, he's big, he's strong. It's pretty much his entire character in this movie. Venom looks really accurate. But Tom Hardy, I thought, actually did a pretty good performance and actually was trying fairly hard in the movie. I like Tom Hardy when his performances are decent. Even as Bane, I didn't think he was too bad. His voice was a little silly, and I didn't really appreciate that they kind of shoved him behind the mask, you know. But I felt like here he actually did a good job. He actually tried really hard, I feel like, which is surprising. Like, it actually seems like he had some passion for it. The side characters, Dr. Dan and his girlfriend, whatever her face is, pretty generic. The villain, pretty generic. But I just thought for, in terms of Eddie Brock and Venom, I appreciated the movie, and I feel like there's a chance they can move it forward. I see a lot of people giving this movie like 1-star reviews on Letterboxd and stuff, which, you know, fair enough, it's not great, but I would argue that the movie isn't too long, the movie's not too bloated, Eddie Brock and Venom are okay, and at least it takes it past, it brings the MCU, or maybe not the MCU, but it kind of has an interesting tone for a Marvel movie. It's dark, like Deadpool, although I wish this would be rated R, but it's as dark as it can be for PG-13. And it's funny, but it's not like overly funny. Like Deadpool to me feels like an MCU movie with swear words and references. Like they're clearly trying to kind of emulate the MCU style movie. This one's really small scale as far as an MCU type movie, Marvel movie in general, whatever you want to call it, would go. It takes it into an interesting direction. It's not just like, let's copy the MCU. Like, they did something new with it. Sony strong-armed it into the MCU. And just for the new variety of tone it adds to the MCU, even though not by design, by strong-arming on Sony's part, I would consider it decent, serviceable, but the upper side is serviceable. And while it's not the greatest, I did have a good time with it, and I appreciate what Tom Hardy managed to do with the Eddie Brock character, and I feel like there's a lot of room to move forward and make a pretty decent movie. Next up, we got Doctor Strange. This is another one where tone is kind of what puts it above, like Iron Man 2, Captain America. The love interest is fairly bland. The villain plot was kind of cool, but still a little underwhelming. I thought Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange was a pretty cool fit, and I thought the effects of this movie were really cool. Like really cool, beyond just like CGI monsters shooting lasers at each other. They're doing like a lot of Inception inspired like building stuff, and like that last fight with Dormammu I thought was kind of fun. So overall, it's on the upper part of serviceable. It's pretty decent. I like it. I don't really have much more to say about it, but I like it. So the next several movies I would consider good to great movies. Movies that watching them I actually enjoyed quite a bit. So here we go. So next we have Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame is a continuation of Infinity War, where basically our main 6 heroes and then Rocket Raccoon, Captain Marvel, and Ant-Man basically try to figure out how to fix the world after the end of Infinity War, where everyone's kind of snapped out of existence. All of our heroes are affected by the tragedy. You got like Thor, he kind of becomes an alcoholic, he becomes fat. Iron Man quits superhero business. He's less hopeful until he kind of after a few years starts to feel like the superheroic I can't quit type of thing, which is a good way to kind of harken back to like Iron Man 3, where he retires at the end. You think he's done with Iron Man, and then he kind of just shows up in Age of Ultron, and you're like, okay, I guess he didn't. But this kind of is a way to explain it away. Captain America really keeps hope. He's kind of the antithesis of Steve, he's kind of the antithesis of Iron Man in that way, but it seems like he's kind of running low on hope, and his way of coping is trying to kind of like help others in the way he can, which at this point is like helping group therapy, kind of just trying to help people in other ways. But you can tell he's kind of defeated by the situation. He's losing hope himself, and he realizes that his thinking that everything's going to be okay isn't necessarily always the right answer. You got Black Widow, who feels hopeless, feels responsible, but at the same time still wants to kind of lead the resistance, kind of try to help find the way back. You got Hulk, who basically combined Bruce Banner and Hulk to become Smart Hulk. He's more of a pacifist now. He's a little more quippy than before, I would say. So he kind of almost takes it the opposite direction of Thor, where he's kind of taken the time to like make his life more positive, where Thor's is now more negative. And then you got Hawkeye, who finally starts getting more character. I thought in Age of Ultron he added a little character, little glimmers of it. But him losing his family to the blip, he kind of he starts becoming more ruthless. He's killing crime bosses. He's doing more street level stuff. And it's really cool what they do with all the original Avengers. I felt like they add a lot more depth to a lot of these characters. Like Iron Man already had a good amount of depth. Captain America, Thor started to get some depth with like Ragnarok and stuff. But you kind of show what happens to these heroes when they just completely and utterly fail. And that's what's something kind of cool about Infinity War, which I'll get back to, is that it's kind of like the first 2 Avengers movies, where it's like these huge events and they always succeed, but in Infinity War they fail, and Endgame kind of shows the things they would do to undo that failure and show that as far as it goes, these people can't give up on being heroes. They have to endure, and they would do anything to help people, which I appreciate. So in terms of that, that's all really good. Thanos is really interesting in Infinity War, and then he's killed at the start of this movie and is still pretty interesting because he kind of continues that character. But then we go back to like a 2014 Thanos from Guardians of the Galaxy, and they pull him forward in time, and he's kind of the final villain for the final fight. And he's just not very interesting as far as it goes. Like, he's like, now I'm gonna redo life in general instead of just half of life. He feels more two-dimensional. I know his character isn't really the point of the movie and they just kind of need someone to fight, but I almost would have preferred, instead of making this movie 2.5 hours, make it 2 hours and just have him kind of go through the time heist that Ant-Man leads to kind of get the stones back, undo everything, and maybe, you could still kind of keep the same consequences. Save everybody, but maybe in saving everyone, Tony realizes he has to sacrifice himself. So Tony still dies. Captain America still brings the stone back and goes back in time, comes back, gives Anthony Mackie the shield. It sets everything up. We didn't really need that final fight scene. And the final fight scene has some hokey shit. It kind of just felt bloated and like a little bit like, let's play on these emotions. And I understand, it's the finale that most people wanted to see at the end of the 10 years. But I honestly wouldn't have minded a pretty low-key, relatively ending to the final Avengers movie. Like, one of the really hokey moments in the final fight was like the girl power fight, which I don't mind. If you set that up better, you could have done it. The problem isn't like women are getting the opportunity. It's like, no, people are in completely different points of the battlefield. Like, Wasp sets up the time converter thing, and somehow it's going to send all the stones back in time to the right spot, or transport it so someone can go back in time and get it. I don't really know what the goal is there, but they set that up, and then the van is far away, so then all the girl heroes happen to be in the same spot on the battlefield, and none of like the Doctor Strange wizard guys or any of the male heroes, and they all fight a bunch of creatures, all the female characters. But like Wasp was in the van, so she just kind of teleports over. Scarlet Witch just got beat up by Thanos. So it kind of seems hard to believe. Maybe just have a couple of the girl characters. And they put a lot of focus on it, like a little too much focus, where it's like, okay, Disney, we know what you're doing. It's unnecessary. It kind of just feels like dumb Transformers shit. So that part was kind of hokey, and based on what I heard from behind the scenes, it kind of seems like they made it, and then they kind of had to shoehorn it in, and that's what they did. Like I said, I don't mind girl power moments. I even think like, fuck it, make a all-girl Avengers movie. Even if it's a little contrived how they get together. Like, we as an audience kind of understand the layout of this battlefield. Like, Spider-Man swinging the gauntlet over super far a fucking way. And it's big. It's a big battlefield, and then all the girls just kind of come together to fight for a dramatic girl power scene that's unnecessary, and it kind of takes you out of the movie a bit. But I know like the final like 30 minutes in the fight is just fan service, and who cares about anything else? Who cares if it makes sense? Like I said, it's not I hate SJW thing. It's not. I don't think Marvel was doing the SJW agenda. I just think they thought it would be cool, and people would make news stories on it, and it would get positive attention, and that's why they did it. And it did, and it's cheesy. I'm not gonna go on a rant about hating women or whatever. The plot does get a little boring. The time travel stuff at times. There are parts that are more interesting, like Tony with Howard Stark. That seemed like something they really wanted to do. That was cool. War Machine and Nebula going back to steal the stone from Peter Quill at the start of Guardians. Why was War Machine there other than the fact that War Machine didn't get blipped out in the Infinity War? No good reason. Rocket and Thor going to Asgard was cool. So there were parts of that time travel stuff that was cool, and there were parts that were kind of boring. And I felt like a lot of that could have been cut down. Like, I liked the character moments that the time traveling allowed, like Tony Stark meeting up with Howard Stark, Captain America being able to see Peggy Carter again, Thor being able to talk to his mom again, even though that was from a forgettable movie I didn't give a shit about, really. It all still was cool, good character moments. But then there was all this boring shit I didn't care about. So just because there's a lot of padding, there's a lot of hokey moments. That's kind of why Endgame is where it is. But it is a pretty good movie in terms of character. Like, the character stuff's really good. As an action movie, it kind of feels Transformers-y. I guess that's what I was trying to say. Next up is Spider-Man Far From Home. This is like Spider-Man Homecoming again. I really liked Mysterio, though not as much as Vulture. Is a little higher scale than the first Spider-Man, which I like that progression. Like, you can do Spider-Man more high scale. I felt like it was kind of a detriment to the character having Spider-Man go Spider-Man Homecoming, low scale, he's kind of learning, to Endgame, where it's high scale. But then this movie, it tackles a lot of themes of Spider-Man coping about Endgame. He was gone for 5 years, so now there's people that are older, that used to be younger. A lot of people are having trouble with that. You got, like, Spider-Man kind of like not really believing he can live up to Tony Stark, even though Tony Stark kind of passed the torch to him, and it's like Spider-Man is the next Iron Man, which I think figuratively and like story-wise and in real life is true. Like, Spider-Man is going to do what Iron Man did for the first I guess, era of the MCU, and now Spider-Man's kind of carrying that torch. I mean, for now, because who knows if Sony takes him back, but that's a tangent for another day. So his stuff where he's kind of having his arc continue that he had with Tony in the first movie, and it's just really cool to see. I like the character progression. I like Zendaya as MJ. I think it's a very different take on like the Mary Jane character. I'm interested to see where that goes. It does still kind of shy away from some of the Spider-Man, like I'm broke lore. Still no Uncle Ben stuff. I don't understand why Marvel feels like they can't touch Uncle Ben. I felt like if they weren't going to do it in Homecoming, now is kind of the time. But you can't really go back in Spider-Man 3 and be like, let's touch up on Uncle Ben. Kind of like he doesn't really have trauma in it. I felt like a big part that kind of adds to his character is loss and trauma. And he kind of had that when Liz had to move, but he's moved on from Liz in this movie. So there's no real trauma to Spider-Man. I mean, I guess Tony Stark, but maybe, which is true. So that is decent trauma, I suppose. But most of this movie is just him trying to come to grasp that he's the new Iron Man, more or less. I feel like it'd be cool to introduce some elements of Uncle Ben. Maybe compare how he lost basically his two father figures, Uncle Ben and Iron Man, or Tony Stark. And you could do some stuff with that, but they avoided it. But it's still a serviceable movie. Jake Gyllenhaal's great in it. Tom Holland's great in it. Zendaya's great in it. Everyone's good in it. It's still funny. And I still feel like it was a good expansion. I just hope Spider-Man 3 differentiates the tone a little bit. Maybe wraps up Spider-Man's time in high school. Give him like a high school trilogy. And then Tom Holland seems like he's on it for the long haul. So maybe you could move him out of high school. Start giving him financial issues. Maybe he gets engaged to MJ or something, or a different female character starts different relationships. Kind of keep building his character. Because while I like the idea of the high school thing, him being in like a new year of high school is fairly inconsequential. So I would say maybe the third movie they could have him graduate. It's not like the other Spider-Man movies where it's like one that he's in high school, like the Sam Raimi trilogy. He's in high school for one, but other than like a few scenes, it's inconsequential. Amazing Spider-Man. He's in high school for a few scenes, otherwise it's inconsequential. And by 2, he's out of high school, which is what they did in both. Maybe do a high school trilogy because that's an important time in Spider-Man's life to explore. But then don't be afraid to move on from that. Kind of start diversifying the tone, because I feel like you can make a third one that's similar, but just because you struck lightning once doesn't mean you can redo the same thing over and over again and we're going to keep buying it. I wouldn't have even minded if maybe in the next movie he graduates high school to start. I would almost prefer that to be the end of one of the movies. But depending on how they do the third Spider-Man, they could have him graduate at the end and it still would be good. I just hope they start changing up the tone a bit. Because this, in a way, kind of reminds me of Iron Man 2, where the tone didn't change enough, so people are kind of just like, Let a different director that's competent handle Spider-Man. Let this guy continue, but kind of have him change up the tone a bit. But, overall it's good. And it tackles cool themes. It does feel a little too similar to Homecoming, in my opinion. Next, we have Captain America Winter Soldier. Speaking of tones, this is a good example of a movie that completely changes the tone from the first movie. We introduce Falcon, who comes to be a decent character. Hopefully he grows more. Of course, we have Falcon and Winter Soldier. And I feel like he's kind of been growing on me. Like, he felt a little plain in this movie, but I'm sure Falcon and Winter Soldier will improve him even more. Overall, Captain America and Black Widow's relationship was really fun to explore. Nick Fury is back, so Sam Jackson's in it. Sam Jackson's great in all of these movies that he's prominently featured in. I forgot to mention he's also in Far From Home quite a bit. He was great in that. But it's cool to see like the infiltration of Hydra to the United States. And it's cool seeing how Captain America was affected by Bucky coming back. It felt a lot more like a Jason Bourne-esque movie than Marvel. So it kind of did its own like new tone to it, which is something I hope they start capturing more. I feel like post-Civil War, everything's kind of felt, with the exception of a couple movies, like Thor Ragnarok, everything's felt kind of similar. And I like when they start kind of dipping their toes in the water of different genres. Yeah, it was really good. It did a lot of different things. The plot was intriguing. It felt a lot more like this movie felt like a movie that, with a few minor changes, like him like suplex in a helicopter, it could have been any spy movie, and it was really good. And I think that's what they're going to try to capture with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which has me intrigued. That's kind of what I assume they'll do for that, because it'll be a little more low key. Got Baron Zemo coming back. We have U.S. Agent, so a lot of like low key villains slash anti-heroes that they're going to come up against and team up with. So I'm excited for that, because it'll kind of recapture this tone. Hopefully not like too derivatively like Spider-Man Far From Home did, but it's good. Yeah, it's a really good movie. Next we have Civil War. This movie kind of bridges the gap between the tones of like an Avengers movie and Winter Soldier. While this does have a lot of like generic fights, I feel like the thing it does really well is it expands on Tony's character a bit, but it doesn't get lost in that too much. Like, it has more consequential changes to Tony's character than the other two Avengers movies, but at the same time, it knows it's a Captain America movie and it keeps its focus on Captain America. It introduces T'Challa, so Black Panther, who turns out to be a pretty good character as time goes on. And in this movie, he's great. And Spider-Man, who, of course, was portrayed by Tom Holland. We don't get much of him here, but cool stuff. And the first time Ant-Man kind of interacts with the team. So this kind of expands the Avengers a lot more. And puts them in more of a place that we'd see in like Infinity War with so many heroes. But, you know, the fight scenes are cool, if a little weird and awkward. But the intrigue with like the reveal that Winter Soldier killed Tony's parents, and that, you know, that kind of rift between Tony and Captain America, instead of becoming like a, you know, kind of like a minor friendly feud, becomes this huge battle. It's interesting. And it's done different enough from the comics, but it still keeps enough that it's like a pretty good way to adapt a comic series, like a comic story arc. And I really liked it. I thought it did it really well, and I think it really pushed Captain America's character more forward than anything. Like, I feel like this pushed Captain America's character forward in a way that you know, is similar to how Iron Man's character was pushed forward with Iron Man 3. So it's really good. I enjoyed it. And while it does have a little more Avengers than I'd like, and a little less Captain America than I'd like, it still keeps a pretty good balance. And obviously for a story like this, you kind of gotta have the Avengers in there. So I liked it. It was good. Next we have Infinity War. I really enjoyed Infinity War, where Avengers Endgame kind of focuses on like the first era of Marvel heroes. Ironically, like Endgame is kind of their finale. Infinity War is kind of like the second introduction to these characters. A lot of them we've met, but this fleshes them out. Like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man are both fantastic in this movie. Robert Downey Jr. kind of phones it in as Iron Man. He doesn't really go anywhere, but it sets up the stage for Endgame, which I think is a pretty great performance by Robert Downey Jr. and pushes his character forward quite a bit. So I think it's more, since he's just less important, it doesn't do much for him. Wanda, Scarlet Witch, and Vision get pushed forward quite a bit. A lot of the action scenes are really cool. The villains are pretty cool. Like, while Thanos' like team of 5 enforcer guys, I don't remember what their name is, they're a little generic. Thanos has to be one of the best characters or villains in the MCU. Like, his motivations are actually pretty great, and it kind of did what like Into the Spider-Verse did with Miles, where you take kind of a two-dimensional comic character that I'm not a huge fan of particularly, and kind of expands them past, like, Miles is a Peter clone. He's just kind of black Peter Parker. But in Into Spider-Verse, they kind of expand his character to the point where I'm like, damn, he's actually a really cool character, and while he has similarities, he's also unique in many ways. Thanos expands in a different way, where, you know, the reason he's doing this is for what in his mind is the greater good, which I feel like is a realistic motivation that a lot of characters in comic book movies don't have. I mean, you look at like Joker, his whole motivation is chaos, And a lot of the other villains are just motivated by taking over the world or getting revenge. Thanos doesn't really want revenge. He doesn't really want to take over the world. He doesn't really want to destroy the world. I mean, he does in Endgame, but that's because Endgame didn't care about Thanos anymore because they killed the real Thanos. But in this movie, he actually is a deep character. This is a Thanos movie co-starring the Avengers. And it was great for those reasons. The Guardians were fun in it. I wouldn't have minded if they did bring the Guardians of the Galaxy back for this movie and just did not include them or didn't give them a second movie, but had them come back for Infinity War somehow, because I don't know. That's just my opinion on that matter, I guess. I don't know what I'm going to say about that. What I have to say about that, but that's just the vibe I get from Guardians, where I feel like you give them one good movie, you have them show up in this crossover, and that would be kind of a cool way to show, like, hey, we're around, but we're not going to do more movies because we don't have the right story to tell. Which, even though Guardians kind of 2 did kind of... Whatever. I'm getting on a tangent, and I'm not going to talk about this. But the effects are cool. The battles are cool. They actually did a fantastic job, considering they were balancing like 50 characters. So yeah, I really enjoyed Infinity War. Next, we have Spider-Man Homecoming. I talked about this kind of already with Far From Home, but Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. both did a great job. Michael Keaton did a great job. I like seeing Michael Keaton as the Vulture, because in ways it's kind of a dark reflection to his character in Batman. And I think it's kind of funny, like he has Birdman, which in many ways kind of reflects Batman. Not so much, but this is more of a literal version of that. Like in Birdman, he thinks he's a superhero in his mind. I don't remember fucking Birdman, but it's similar. It's similar. A way to kind of reflect his Batman character, but I find this to be a pretty interesting way to do it, just because it's like he's now directly the villain. He seems to be having fun with it. This character is kind of loud, extroverted, and over the top, where Batman's quiet, introverted, and subdued. Obviously, Batman's a hero. He's a villain now. But Vulture has motivation. He cares for his family, and he's making money because he kind of got screwed over, so he kind of uses that as a way to justify his actions. And he's honorable. He doesn't, like, snitch out Spider-Man. He's not the most complex villain in this universe, but he is a pretty dang good villain, I'd say. And, you know, I didn't talk about this in the Far From Home, but the reason I like him better than Mysterio, well, Mysterio's a decent villain. He's charismatic. The performance is good. Mysterio works better if you don't know the twist, but I feel like everyone knows the twist of Mysterio. Except for, like, general audiences, but even then, like, I know a lot of people who don't know much about comics, but if they have basic knowledge, they know who Mysterio is. So Mysterio is just a good villain, but without, he kind of doesn't have the greatest motivation. Without the twist, it just doesn't make him anything particularly special. But Michael Keaton, how they shot and made Vulture, makes him pretty special. I think it's cool that Peter's love interest is Vulture's daughter. It's a little contrived, granted, but Peter's love life in the comics and in the TV shows and even in the previous movies is really turbulent. That continues here, but in a unique way we haven't seen explored before. And there's a lot of themes in these movies that haven't really been explored in previous Spider-Man movies, which I really like. I liked the modernization of a lot of these characters, like Flash Thompson, and just kind of all the other Spider-Man characters we see modernized. And it's really fun. Like Aunt May, too, is a great example. I would say, like, in terms of, like, Peter Parker, Tom Holland is far and away the best Peter Parker we've had. I'm glad they skipped over the origin shit, even though I wish Uncle Ben kind of affected him more, although in many ways Tony Stark is his Uncle Ben. And since Tony Stark kind of told him the same thing as Uncle Ben, I almost would have, like, there are, like, Easter eggs to show that Uncle Ben was a thing, but I almost wouldn't mind if Uncle Ben, if his origin was changed so Uncle Ben is less significant in it. I know that might sound mean or something, or, like, blasphemy for a Spider-Man fan, but I feel like Tony Stark kind of fills that role. So in ways like if Uncle Ben died before he was born, or Uncle Ben died when he was young and wasn't necessarily killed by a mugger, I wouldn't really mind. Not to say that Uncle Ben's significance should be gone, but I feel like the role that he's filled would be kind of redundant with Tony there, especially since they didn't really compare the deaths in like Far From Home. But that was just kind of a ramble. Yeah, but this was a great movie. I obviously really liked it. The supporting cast is better than most. I feel like non-hero supporting cast in a lot of these movies kind of gets nothing to do. They're kind of just there. Like Doctor Strange's love interest. I dare you to comment what her name is, without Wikipedia in it. But at least this, like, we have MJ, great character. Aunt May, great character. Liz, funny character, not much to do but funny. No, not Liz. Who was I thinking of? Whatever. Liz, pretty decent love interest. More, a little generic like the other love interests, but at least unique. Oh, my computer's got an update. Ned, he's funny. He's great. So it's a good movie. I really like it. It has a lot of heart. Great villains, great heroes. Just good stuff in general. Next, we have Thor Ragnarok. This was a movie that when I heard it was coming out, I wasn't very excited about it. I saw the trailers. I'm like, it looks cool. It looks good, which the second Thor movie has some decent cinematography, nothing special. The first one looks like absolute shit. So I'm like, at least it looks good. But Chris Hemsworth's performance as Thor finally gained charisma. Like, it started to show a little bit in Age of Ultron, but this is the movie where it broke through, and Thor finally had a really decent character to him. And that was awesome. I love Chris Hemsworth as Thor now. He went from probably one of my least favorite MCU characters to one of my favorites over the course of one movie. Him and Loki's dynamic improved. He finally his charisma kind of surpasses Loki's, which is funny because he feels like a cardboard cutout compared to Loki in the early MCU appearances. His look is cool. He feels more unique. Hulk is great in it. Valkyrie's a cool new character. Jeff Goldblum is great. I thought like him releasing Ragnarok to destroy Asgard is cool. Kind of the hope that both gets instilled at the end but also taken away at the end is great. The Colosseum battle against Hulk is so cool. So I really enjoyed Ragnarok. Not to say much more. Taika Waititi's a great director. I actually discovered him through Thor Ragnarok, which is awesome. I still haven't seen all his movies, but like his newest movie, Jojo Rabbit, fantastic. Very different from Thor, but also well shot, well written. Taika Waititi plays Hitler, which is cool. Taika Waititi's also done a lot of The Mandalorian, which is a show I enjoyed quite a bit. In other words, Taika Waititi, and Thor Ragnarok in general, but Taika Waititi I think is definitely one of those Marvel directors that he's someone worth watching, and that's why I'm very curious. I'm actually like my most anticipated MCU movie right now is Thor 4, unless they get Sam Raimi on Doctor Strange. Then it's Doctor Strange, because Sam Raimi's great. So is Taika Waititi though. So check out his other movies. I think it goes without saying, I love Thor Ragnarok. Really good movie. Next is Guardians of the Galaxy. This is a movie that I was interested in beforehand. I was vaguely aware of who the Guardians of the Galaxy were as a comic fan, but even to me, they weren't the most well known until this movie came out where they became like a pillar of Marvel. But I was interested. I kind of felt like, even if it wasn't the greatest, maybe I'd get some Star Wars hype released. This is pre-Force Awakens, of course, 2014. So I was like, maybe it'll do like a little bit of Star Wars goodness and something unique with Marvel. So I was excited, and it blew me away. It was great. Soundtrack, fantastic. How they implemented the soundtrack into the film, fantastic. James Gunn getting mainstream work besides the Scooby-Doo movies, fantastic. Chris Pratt, everyone in this movie is fantastic on the Guardians. How they interact, they become like a genuine family. This movie does a better job of balancing 5 characters that we'd never seen before, as compared to Avengers trying to balance 6, 3 of which had at least one solo movie, in Iron Man's case 2, and the villain was okay. It was, it has a lot of really great elements to it. I find it harder to talk about these great movies than the bad ones. It's shot really nice, it's funny, has a lot of heart, and, well, originally I went to see this movie in the theaters, anticipating it to be kind of my Star Wars fix to last through the hype for Episode 7. Once the Star Wars sequel trilogy pretty much was serviceable to garbage, now Guardians of the Galaxy stands as a pillar of a great movie. So the people who actually sat through the video to this point and saw that I'm not just a hater that hates on Guardians of the Galaxy based on what I said about 2, you can understand I actually really do admire this movie, but it's a concept I would be scared they would try to beat to death. I almost hope 3 is the finale at this point. Like, if 3 has to get made, I hope 3 is the finale. And I think actually the idea that Thor might be in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, kind of what's implied in Endgame, but although I know he's supposed to be in Thor 4 too, depending how they shake that up, that could be awesome. I would love if Thor just became a supporting character to Guardians and was doing his own thing with Jane Foster Thor in Love and Thunder. Or the Thor second trilogy, Thor continued stories. I guess it's not, the first Thor trilogy isn't even a trilogy. What am I talking about? It's 2 shitty movies that they made out of obligation and a really good movie that was made because a filmmaker had a vision. Maybe the first 2 Thor movies will just be a fluke and Taika Waititi will do a trilogy. The Thor trilogy and the 2 other ones. But yeah, no, Guardians is great. I'd recommend it highly. Next is Iron Man, the movie that started it all. When I first started reading comics was in 10 years old, 2008. I didn't have any family or friends that read comics. I kind of got into it on my own because I liked The Dark Knight, and then I really fucking loved Iron Man. This movie has a lot of the tropes of the early era of Marvel, in many ways. Or the 2000s era, I should say, not early. But unlike Incredible Hulk, it kind of takes those, embraces those, and makes a really interesting character study on Tony Stark, mixes it in with a ton of action that makes the pacing feel, for an action movie, pretty impressive, because we both have aspects of great character development, constant great action. We see Tony as a degenerate. We see him kind of grow as a person. We see his technology kind of grow. We see that cool like tech that Tony makes with all those cool like montages where he's like, I'm gonna make up my suit. Jeff Bridges is super great as Warmonger. While his character isn't the deepest villain in the MCU, especially for the debut outing, it was great. And I remember seeing this as a kid before I even knew the concept of what they were trying to do. And this was an era where I was like, I really want more Marvel movies now. And when Nick Fury came in this one and came in Incredible Hulk, I was like, holy shit, they're going to connect all of these? And now I'm 12 years later and I'm pretty beat down. I've seen way too many of these. I kind of watch them once and then get done. But I've watched Iron Man 1 at least 40 times. Like, I love this movie. I still have the old beatdown DVD. Looks dirty. But I love it. And it's just a movie that, maybe nostalgia moves it up on the list a little bit. But you can't lie and act like Robert Downey Jr. Like, it's hard to say Robert Downey Jr.'s charisma doesn't put him up there as at least one of the best Marvel heroes. I consider him my favorite in this universe, but I think 99% of people would not deny that Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., isn't one of the best. And I feel like he took the character of Iron Man, this movie. You can't forget that Jon Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. did a lot to advance the character in general to what we have today in the comics and in the movies and in the games and everywhere. And they took Iron Man to a new level. Not to say that Iron Man didn't have good stories before, but he wasn't the most complex, he wasn't the most famous, and now they essentially did a huge part in creating the character we have now, who stands up with Iron Man as one of Marvel's most valuable IPs, which before this movie simply wasn't the case. This movie's fantastic, it's great, it's fun, and it's one of the only Marvel movies where I can dust it off once a year and not be like, okay, I roll repetitive. It's like, this movie was badass then, it's badass now, and this is basically like, in many ways, my generation's like Star Wars A New Hope or something. I guess you wouldn't call it A New Hope, just Star Wars. But yeah, really great movie, really cool. But my final movie, which if you guys can keep track of my list, you already know it. But it's Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 is a fantastic movie start to finish, in my opinion. The reason I love Iron Man 1 isn't because of Iron Man. Partially, Iron Man's a cool hero, but the biggest thing is Tony Stark is such a great character. Robert Downey Jr. did such a good job of encapsulating that character that I wouldn't really consider Iron Man 3 Iron Man 3. I'd consider it more of Tony Stark the movie. This movie it's really more of a character study of Tony Stark, a deconstruction. He's kind of starting to feel like he has to move on from Iron Man. Like, at the start of the movie, he's obsessed with Iron Man. He has hundreds of suits. He's doing all these things. He's trying to hunt down the Mandarin, his most formidable foe yet, who in the comics is traditionally a very formidable Iron Man. He's Iron Man's Joker or whatever. But in this movie, he's just a guy. And Iron Man spent all this time trying to track him. And it's a lot of this movie, Tony doesn't even have a suit. He breaks down. He meets up with generic kid who, unfortunately, or fortunately, I think fortunately, but basically the kid gets replaced by Spider-Man with his story, but you can see even here, like, he cares about the next generation. He really cares about people. And it's just really cool. His relationship with Gwyneth Paltrow, I think, is on display and better than ever in this movie. And even though a lot of this movie takes place out of the suit, when they do an action scene, it feels meaningful, it feels important, and they're badass set pieces beyond like even in like Endgame, you look, that probably has it does have the biggest budget for effects and action scenes. It's a lot of dudes shooting lasers at each other. There are some emotional parts, but that is more of a vessel to see cool shit and get some emotional points across, like Iron Man dying. This movie, you got like the scene where Iron Man is trying to figure out how to save all the people from the airplane, and Air Force One's crashing or whatever the hell. And he manages to save all of them. You kind of see his thought process, and he's struggling to do this. He does it just in the nick of time, but it's really cool. And then even the final fight is really ingenuitive. Tony's kind of jumping between suits, and it's just really good. Like, Shane Black made a truly amazing movie, and I know this one's really like one of those movies where a lot of people debate the merit of this movie. Whether it's good, whether it's bad. I feel like a lot of people who didn't like it just didn't like the twist. And the first time I saw it, I didn't really like the twist either. And I was disappointed about what they did with Mandarin. But seeing it in reflection and kind of moving past 15-year-old comic-obsessed me, I see like a really decent character study, a decent, just a decent way to kind of end the Iron Man trilogy. And well, I was disappointed at first that they brought Iron Man back for like Age of Ultron and didn't really address what happened, and they completely fumbled his character. At least the Russos kind of managed to save that with like his arc of I can't stop helping people till I'm literally dead. We basically see an Endgame, which kind of revives it. Anyway, that was my ranking of the MCU movies. If you want to check out my list, it's on my Letterboxd, which I'll put in the description down below. I have rankings of all sorts of movies. I've done like Quentin Tarantino. I've done the DCEU. I really only rank stuff that I've watched. I've watched Friday the 13th is on there too. Godzilla. I'm really only ranking stuff I've seen since I started this channel back in like 2016, or restarted doing a lot of these reviews. So if there's stuff that's not in there, you know, chances are I've seen it, and chances are I'm going to get to it. I want to do more videos like this where I kind of just go on the camera and like impromptu rank stuff off my letterbox. So if you want to follow that letterbox and kind of see what's going on, you can do that. If you want to follow me on YouTube, I'll make more of this stuff. I'll make more Why It Sucks, which are like my film essay things. I'll probably make more shit posts. But I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you want, you can also leave comments down below. Rank your favorite Marvel movies. Do a top 5. Do a top 10. Rank the whole 24. Whatever you have time for. And I'll try to read those, respond to those. I think it's interesting with so many films and so many different interpretations of how people take these films. I'm really interested to see what your guys' favorites are. You might have a completely opposite list to me. I'm sure some people will, because I think mine are a little out there. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys.